When I first met Alan, I wasn't looking for anything. In fact, I wasn't even looking at him. At least not at first. I was too busy scanning the room at the parent-teacher meeting, trying to spot a seat in the crowded cafeteria, and hoping it would all be over quickly. But then I saw him. He was sitting off to the side, half turned in his chair, his sleeves rolled up and his hands resting loosely on his knees. There was something about the way he held himself. Calm, composed, but with a quiet weight in his expression that hinted at something deeper. His eyes met mine briefly, and he gave me a polite nod, the kind you give a stranger out of habit more than recognition. But even that small gesture felt significant, as if we'd exchanged something unspoken in that moment. I sat down a few rows away, determined to focus on the teacher's presentation about upcoming exams and extracurricular schedules. But I couldn't help myself. My eyes kept drifting back to him. He wasn't traditionally handsome, not in the way you'd see on a magazine cover, but there was a ruggedness to him that was magnetic. Salt and pepper hair that looked like he ran his fingers through it too often, a neatly trimmed beard that softened the sharp angles of his jaw. He wore a simple button-down shirt and dark jeans. Nothing special, but on him it looked effortlessly put together. I told myself I was just curious, that he was simply another parent, someone I might bump into during a school event and forget about the next day. But when the meeting ended and we all stood to leave, he approached me before I had the chance to slip away. "You're Emma's mom, right?" he asked, his voice warm and deep, with just a hint of hesitance. "Yes," I said, my heart skipping a beat at the sound of his voice. "And you're?" "Alan, Chloe's dad," he said, extending a hand. The pieces clicked into place. Chloe was Emma's best friend, the two of them practically inseparable since middle school. Alan must have been the father I'd heard about in passing, the architect who'd recently moved to town after his divorce. We exchanged the usual pleasantries, but there was an ease to our conversation that surprised me. He asked about Emma, about her plans for the summer, and mentioned that Chloe had been talking non-stop about a summer camp they were both excited to attend. His tone was casual, but the way he looked at me felt anything but. When we said goodbye, his handshake lingered just a second too long, his thumb brushing against the side of my hand. It was such a small thing, so fleeting, but it sent a shiver up my spine. As I walked back to my car that night, I couldn't stop thinking about him. Later, I told myself it was nothing. Just a momentary spark, the kind that happens when you meet someone new and intriguing. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. And as much as I tried to ignore it, I knew I'd be seeing him again. I wasn't the kind of woman who believed in fate, but meeting Alan felt like something I couldn't explain away. Still, I tried to. For days after that parent-teacher meeting, I convinced myself that our connection had been one-sided, a fleeting moment that I'd read too much into. I'd done this before, created stories in my head about people who would come and go from my life, projecting possibilities onto them like it could fill the emptiness I didn't want to confront. But Alan didn't leave my mind as easily as the others. My life hadn't exactly been a whirlwind of romance and excitement over the past few years. After my divorce, most of my time had been devoted to work and raising Emma. Freelance graphic design gave me the flexibility to be there for her whenever she needed me, but it also meant long hours at home, alone, staring at screens. The divorce itself had been amicable, civil even. My ex-husband and I had grown apart over the years, our marriage becoming more like a business partnership than a relationship. By the time we decided to end it, there wasn't much left to fight about. But the civility didn't make it hurt any less. The nights were the worst, the silence in the house deafening after Emma went to bed. I'd sit in the living room with a glass of wine, scrolling through social media and seeing pictures of couples traveling, laughing, building lives together. And I'd wonder if that was it for me, if my chance at something real and lasting had come and gone. I tried dating once or twice after the divorce, but it never felt right. Every man I met seemed either too eager or too detached, and I didn't have the energy to pretend I was interested when I wasn't. So I stopped trying. Alan's life, as I would come to learn, had its own share of complications. We ran into each other again a few weeks after the parent-teacher meeting. This time, it was at a school fundraiser, One of those events where parents bid on donated items to support the arts program. I'd been cornered by another parent who was trying to convince me to sign up for the bake sale when I saw him across the room, holding a glass of wine and looking as out of place as I felt. When he caught my eye, he smiled, and I excused myself, weaving through the crowd until I reached him. "Fundraisers aren't your thing, huh?" I said, raising an eyebrow. He laughed softly. "Is it that obvious?" We talked for a while, and it didn't take long for the conversation to drift to more personal territory. He told me about his divorce, how his ex-wife had moved across the country to start fresh, leaving him to figure out how to rebuild his relationship with Chloe. "She blames me for everything," he admitted, his voice tinged with regret. "I don't think she'll ever see me the same way again." I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that Chloe would come around eventually, but I knew how complicated those relationships could be. Emma had taken our divorce in stride, but there were moments when I caught glimpses of resentment in her eyes, moments when she seemed to blame me for the way our family had fallen apart. "She's a teenager," I said instead, trying to sound reassuring. "They're not exactly known for their emotional clarity. Give her time." He nodded, but the weight in his expression didn't lift. Over the next few months, Alan and I saw more of each other. At first, it was in the context of our daughters, school events, carpools, shared dinners, where Chloe and Emma would eat quickly before running off to Emma's room to blast music and gossip. But somewhere along the way, the conversations we had when the girls weren't around started to feel different. One evening, after Chloe had gone home and Emma was upstairs studying, Alan stayed behind to help me clean up after dinner. "You don't have to do that," I said, as he loaded the dishwasher. "I don't mind," he replied, glancing over his shoulder with a small smile. We worked side by side in the quiet of the kitchen, the sound of running water and clinking dishes filling the space between us. When we were done, we sat at the table, each nursing a glass of wine as we talked about everything and nothing. It was in those moments, those quiet, unguarded conversations, that I started to see him in a different light. He was funny, in a dry, self-deprecating way that caught me off guard. He told me about the time he tried to build a treehouse for Chloe and ended up falling out of the tree, breaking his arm in the process. "She thought it was the funniest thing she'd ever seen," he said, shaking his head. "Still brings it up every chance she gets." He was thoughtful too, asking questions that went deeper than the surface-level small talk I was used to. "Do you ever feel like you're just drifting?" he asked one night, his eyes searching mine. "Like you're waiting for something to happen, but you don't know what?" I nodded, my chest tightening at the familiarity of his words. "All the time," I admitted. The shift between us was subtle, almost imperceptible at first, a lingering glance here, a touch that lasted a second too long there. But the moment it all changed came on a warm summer day when we both drove the girls to camp. It was a 2-hour drive to the drop-off point, and we decided to carpool, Alan driving while the girls chattered away in the back seat. When we arrived, the camp counselors whisked Emma and Chloe away almost immediately, leaving us with a few hours to kill before the scheduled parent meeting. Alan suggested we grab a coffee at a nearby cafe, and I agreed, grateful for the company. We sat by the window, the sunlight streaming in as we sipped our drinks and talked. At first, the conversation was light. Work, the girls, our mutual frustrations with the school's endless fundraisers. But then he asked me about my divorce, and I found myself opening up in a way I hadn't with anyone else. "I always thought I'd be one of those people who made it," I said, staring into my coffee. "That no matter what, we'd figure it out. But somewhere along the way, we just stopped trying." He nodded, his expression somber. "I know what you mean. You wake up one day and realize you don't even recognize the person next to you anymore." For a moment, we just sat there, the weight of our shared experiences hanging between us. Then he reached across the table, his hand brushing against mine. "I've been wanting to tell you something," he said, his voice low and steady. "I don't know if it's the right time, but I can't keep it to myself anymore." I looked at him, my heart pounding. "What is it?" He hesitated, his thumb tracing small circles on the back of my hand. "I think I've been drawn to you since the first time we met. And the more I get to know you, the harder it is to pretend I don't feel this way." His words hung in the air, and I felt a rush of emotions. Fear, exhilaration, guilt, all swirling together. "Alan," I started, but he shook his head. "You don't have to say anything," he said quickly. "I just needed you to know." But instead of pulling away, I found myself leaning closer, my eyes locked on his. And before I could think better of it, his lips were on mine, soft and tentative, but filled with a heat that left me breathless. When we finally pulled back, I couldn't bring myself to speak. All I knew was that something between us had shifted, and there was no going back. I can still feel the heat of that first kiss when I think about it now. The way the world seemed to narrow down to just him, the faint hum of the cafe fading into the background as his lips met mine. It was the kind of kiss that didn't ask permission, but somehow still felt gentle, like a secret being whispered into the air. When we pulled away, we didn't say anything for a long time. Alan's hand was still on mine, his thumb brushing slow, deliberate circles against my skin. I was too stunned to move, my thoughts a jumbled mix of exhilaration and guilt. "I shouldn't have done that," he said finally, his voice quiet. But there was no regret in his eyes, only a softness that made my chest ache. "I didn't stop you," I replied, my own voice barely above a whisper. For a moment, I thought he might kiss me again, but instead he leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know what this means," he said, his gaze dropping to the table. "But I haven't been able to stop thinking about you." I wanted to tell him I felt the same way, that he wasn't the only one who'd been losing sleep over this strange, undeniable connection between us. But before I could find the words, my phone buzzed on the table, breaking the spell. "It's the girls," I said, glancing at the screen. "The meeting's about to start." He nodded, but the moment wasn't over. It hung between us, unresolved and heavy with possibility, as we left the cafe and drove back to the camp. The parent meeting was uneventful, but I couldn't focus. My mind kept replaying that kiss, the way his hand had felt on mine, the way his voice had trembled ever so slightly when he admitted how he felt. Alan was quiet too, his usual easy demeanor replaced by something more restrained. When the meeting ended, we walked back to the car in silence, the air between us charged with everything we weren't saying. As we drove home, the tension only grew. The girls were chatty in the back seat, oblivious to the weight of what had just happened between their parents. Alan's hands gripped the steering wheel a little too tightly, his jaw clenched as if he were trying to hold himself together. I kept stealing glances at him, my heart racing every time our eyes met in the rearview mirror. But we didn't speak. Not about the kiss, not about anything that had passed between us. It was as though we both knew that once we started, there'd be no stopping. I didn't expect to hear from him that night. I thought we'd both let it simmer, maybe even try to pretend it hadn't happened. But just as I was settling onto the couch with a glass of wine, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Alan. "Can I see you?" 3 words. So simple, but they set my heart racing in a way I hadn't felt in years. I stared at the screen, my mind warring with itself. I knew what I should do. Ignore it, let the moment pass, and keep things from spiraling into something we couldn't control. But the truth was, I didn't want to ignore him. "Where?" I typed back before I could talk myself out of it. He responded almost immediately. "My place. Chloe's staying at a friend's tonight." His house was on the other side of town, a modest but beautifully designed home that reflected his profession as an architect. My hands trembled as I knocked on the door, my mind racing with 1,000 doubts. When Alan opened it, his expression was equal parts nervous and relieved. He stepped aside to let me in, and I felt the warmth of his home envelop me as I crossed the threshold. "Hi," he said, his voice soft but steady. "Hi," I replied, suddenly hyper-aware of how close we were standing. For a moment, we just looked at each other, the silence stretching out until it was almost unbearable. And then he reached for me, his hand sliding to the small of my back as he pulled me closer. "I haven't been able to stop thinking about you," he said, his voice low and rough. "Me neither," I admitted, my heart pounding as his lips brushed against mine. This time, the kiss wasn't tentative. It was urgent, hungry, as if all the restraint we'd been clinging to had finally snapped. His hands moved to my hips, gripping me firmly as he guided me backward, his body pressing against mine. Before I knew it, we were in his living room, tangled together on the couch. His lips trailed down my neck, his hands exploring me with a reverence that made my breath hitch. "Are you sure?" he asked, pulling back just enough to meet my eyes. "Yes," I whispered, my voice trembling but certain. And with that, the floodgates opened. When it was over, we lay tangled together on the couch, the room dimly lit by the glow of a nearby lamp. My head rested on his chest, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat grounding me as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. "I don't know what this means," I said quietly, my fingers tracing lazy patterns on his shirt. "Neither do I," he admitted, his voice rumbling in his chest. "But I don't want to stop." His words sent a rush of warmth through me, but they also brought a flicker of fear. This wasn't just about us, there were the girls to think about, the delicate balance of our lives that we'd just upended. "We have to be careful," I said, sitting up to look at him. "If Chloe or Emma found out." "They won't," he said firmly, reaching for my hand. "We'll be careful. I promise." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that we could keep this secret, that the connection we'd found could exist without tearing everything else apart. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't be that simple. The days after that night at Alan's house were a blur. I carried the memory of his touch, his voice, the way he made me feel alive in a way I hadn't in years. But with every stolen glance at Emma, every casual mention of Chloe, guilt wormed its way into my chest. Still, I couldn't stop. The next time we saw each other, it was during one of Chloe and Emma's study sessions. The girls had taken over the dining room table, their books and laptops spread out as they giggled over inside jokes. Alan arrived to pick Chloe up early, knocking on the door and flashing me a smile that sent a shiver down my spine. "Thanks for letting her crash here again," he said, his voice low as we stood in the kitchen. "Of course," I replied, trying to ignore the heat rising in my cheeks. For a moment, we were silent, the sound of the girls' laughter drifting in from the other room. Then, without warning, he stepped closer, his hand brushing against mine on the counter. "Can I see you tonight?" he murmured, his eyes searching mine. I hesitated, glancing toward the dining room. "Alan, we need to be careful." "We are being careful," he said, his voice steady. "But I can't stop thinking about you. I don't want to." His words melted my resolve, and before I could second-guess myself, I nodded. That evening I drove to his house again, my heart racing with anticipation and fear. Chloe was spending the night at Emma's, giving us a rare window of freedom. When I arrived, Alan was waiting for me at the door, his expression softening the moment he saw me. "Hi," he said, pulling me inside. "Hi," I replied, my voice trembling. This time there was no hesitation. He led me to the living room, his hands sliding to my waist as he kissed me with a hunger that made my knees weak. We moved together like we'd done this 100 times before, his touch igniting a fire in me that I hadn't felt in years. Later, as we lay tangled together on the couch, the room bathed in the soft glow of the fireplace, I found myself smiling. "What?" he asked, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "Nothing," I said, shaking my head. I didn't think I could feel like this again." "Me neither," he admitted, his voice low. In that moment, everything felt perfect. Dangerous, but perfect. Over the next few weeks, our relationship became a careful dance of stolen moments and whispered promises. We'd meet for coffee during lunch breaks, his hand brushing against mine under the table. He'd text me late at night, simple messages that sent my heart racing. "I miss you. Thinking about you." And when the opportunity arose, we'd find ways to be alone. An afternoon at his house while Chloe was out with friends, a quick kiss in the hallway while the girls were distracted. Every encounter felt like a gamble, the thrill of the risk heightening the intensity of what we shared. But the guilt was never far behind. One evening, as Emma and I sat on the couch watching a movie, she turned to me suddenly, her brow furrowed. "You've been acting weird lately," she said, her tone curious. I froze, my heart pounding. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," she said, shrugging. "You're just different. Happier, I guess? Did something happen?" "No, nothing," I said quickly, forcing a smile. "Just busy with work." She didn't look convinced, but she didn't press the issue. Still, her comment stayed with me, a reminder of how precarious our situation had become. The boldest risk we took was a weekend trip to a nearby lake. The girls were away at a school-sponsored retreat. giving us a rare opportunity to escape without the constant threat of discovery. Alan booked a small cabin, secluded and quiet, surrounded by trees that glowed golden in the late autumn sunlight. The moment we arrived, it felt like the weight of the world melted away. We spent the weekend wrapped in each other, our connection deepening with every touch, every stolen glance. There were no distractions, no guilt, just us. One night, as we lay on the porch swing, the stars glittering above us, Alan turned to me, his expression serious. "I don't want this to end," he said, his voice steady. "Me neither," I admitted, my chest tightening. "Then let's stop hiding," he said, his hand covering mine. The idea terrified me, but a part of me couldn't help but wonder if he was right. Could we make this work without tearing everything apart? But the closer we grew, the harder it became to keep our relationship a secret. Chloe started noticing the change in Alan, questioning why he was suddenly happier, why he seemed distracted when she tried to talk to him. "You're seeing someone, aren't you?" she asked him one night, her tone accusatory. "What makes you think that?" he replied, dodging the question. "Because you're different," she said, narrowing her eyes. "And I want to know who she is." Alan managed to deflect her suspicion for the moment, but the tension was growing. The closest call came one afternoon when the girls came home earlier than expected. Alan and I had been sitting on the couch, our conversation drifting into familiar, dangerous territory. When we heard the door open, we sprang apart, my heart racing as Emma and Chloe walked in, their laughter filling the house. "Hey, Mom," Emma called, glancing toward the living room. "Hey, girls," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Alan stood quickly, smoothing his shirt. "I should get going," he said, his tone casual. Chloe gave him a curious look as he passed her, and for a moment, I thought she might say something. But she didn't. Every time we were together, I told myself it would be the last time. That I'd end it before the truth came out and everything fell apart. But every time, I found myself going back to him, unable to resist the pull he had on me. And deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before the truth came to light. The closer Alan and I grew, the more fragile our secret became. I could feel the walls closing in around us, the weight of what we were doing pressing down harder with each passing day. The thing about secrets is that they never stay buried forever. There's always a moment when the truth cracks through the surface, no matter how careful you are. And for us, that moment was coming. It started with small things. Chloe began to notice changes in Alan, his sudden bursts of cheerfulness, the way he always seemed to be on his phone, smiling at messages she couldn't see. One evening, as she sat at the dining room table doing homework, she looked up at him with a skeptical expression. "You've been weird lately," she said, her tone half teasing, half accusatory. Alan froze mid-sip of his coffee. "Weird how?" he asked, keeping his voice light. "I don't know," Chloe said, narrowing her eyes. "You're smiling all the time. It's creepy." He laughed, brushing off her comment, but her gaze lingered a little too long, her curiosity clearly piqued. Meanwhile, Emma wasn't blind to the changes in me either. "Mom, are you dating someone?" she asked one night as we cleaned up after dinner. The question caught me off guard, and I nearly dropped the plate I was holding. "What? No, of course not," I said quickly, my voice a little too high. She raised an eyebrow, her expression skeptical. "You've just been different, happier. It's not a bad thing, but I feel like you're not telling me something." I forced a laugh, brushing off her observation. "I'm just busy with work," I said. "That's all." But Emma wasn't convinced. The moment everything came crashing down happened on a Saturday night. Emma and Chloe had gone to a party at a friend's house, leaving Alan and me with a rare evening alone. He came over to my place, bringing a bottle of wine and that easy, confident smile that made my heart race. We spent the evening on the couch, talking and laughing, the conversation slipping into familiar, intimate territory. I don't know what made me let my guard down that night. Maybe it was the wine, maybe it was the thrill of having the house to ourselves. But when he leaned in to kiss me, I didn't hesitate. We were so lost in each other that we didn't hear the door open. "Mom?" The sound of Emma's voice made my blood run cold. I pulled away from Alan, my heart pounding as I turned to see her and Chloe standing in the doorway, their faces frozen in shock. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence was deafening, the air thick with tension. "What the hell is going on?" Emma demanded, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. I opened my mouth to explain, but no words came out. Alan stood beside me, his expression a mix of guilt and helplessness. Is this some kind of joke? Chloe said, her voice rising. You're hooking up with my dad? Chloe, Alan started, but she cut him off, her eyes blazing with fury. Don't, she snapped. Don't you dare try to explain this. Emma turned to me, her face pale. How could you? She asked, her voice breaking. How could you do this to me? To Chloe? Emma, please, I said, tears streaming down my face. It's not what you think. Not what I think, she interrupted, her voice shaking. What else could it be, Mom? You've been lying to me, sneaking around behind my back, with her dad. Chloe looked at Alan, her voice dripping with betrayal. Is this why you've been so happy lately? Because you've been sleeping with Emma's mom? Chloe, it's more complicated than that, Alan said, his voice steady but pained. No, it's not, she snapped. It's disgusting. The words hit like a punch to the gut. I wanted to explain, to make them understand that what Alan and I had wasn't just some careless fling, but the looks on their faces made it clear that no explanation would matter. I can't believe this, Emma said, shaking her head. I trusted you. Her words broke something in me, and I felt the weight of everything I'd done crashing down all at once. Emma, I'm sorry, I said, my voice trembling. I never meant to hurt you. But you did, she said, her voice cold. And I don't think I can forgive you for this. Emma stormed upstairs, slamming her bedroom door behind her. Chloe didn't even wait. She grabbed her bag and walked out the front door, refusing to look at either of us. Alan started to follow her, but I stopped him. Let her go, I said quietly. He turned to me, his eyes filled with guilt and regret. This wasn't how I wanted them to find out, he said. Neither did I replied, my voice hollow. We stood there in silence for a long moment, the reality of what had just happened sinking in. I should go, he said finally, his voice heavy. I nodded, unable to meet his eyes. Yeah, you should. When the door closed behind him, the house felt unbearably empty. The days that followed were some of the hardest I've ever faced. Emma barely spoke to me, her anger and hurt radiating off her in waves. She avoided me whenever possible, staying out late with friends and locking herself in her room when she was home. I tried to reach out, to apologize, to explain, but every time I did, she shut me down. I don't want to hear it, Mom, she said one night, her voice cold. You made your choice, now you can live with it. Her words left me shattered, but I knew she had every right to be angry. I'd betrayed her trust in the worst way possible, and there was no easy way to fix it. Chloe refused to speak to Alan entirely. She ignored his calls, his texts, and his attempts to reach out to her through mutual friends. She'll come around, Alan said when we finally spoke a week later. But even he didn't sound convinced. I don't know if Emma will, I admitted, my voice breaking. The tension between Emma and me reached its peak one night when I found her packing a bag. Where are you going? I asked, panic rising in my chest. To stay with Dad, she said flatly. Emma, please don't do this, I said, my voice trembling. We can talk about this. There's nothing to talk about, she said, her tone icy. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine. Watching her walk out the door was the hardest thing I've ever done. The house felt impossibly quiet after Emma left. I sat on the couch for hours, staring at the front door, half expecting her to come back and tell me this was all some cruel joke. But she didn't. Her absence was like a weight pressing down on my chest. Every time I walked past her room and saw the door slightly ajar, the emptiness inside was a reminder of how badly I had failed her. For the first few days, I didn't know what to do with myself. I called her, left her messages, but she didn't respond. I wanted to drive to her father's house to beg her to come home, but I knew it wouldn't help. She needed space, and I had no choice but to give it to her. Alan called me the day after Emma left. Have you heard from Chloe? He asked, his voice heavy with worry. No, I admitted, and Emma hasn't spoken to me either. There was a long pause before he spoke again. I don't know how to fix this, he said, his voice cracking slightly. Neither did I. We should give them time, I said finally, though the words felt hollow. They need to process this in their own way. And us? He asked, his voice softer now. I closed my eyes, the weight of the question sinking into me. I don't know, I said honestly. Right now I just need to focus on Emma. I understand, he said, though I could hear the sadness in his voice. It took 2 weeks before Emma finally returned one of my calls. "I'll come over," she said curtly, not giving me a chance to respond before hanging up. When she arrived, she looked guarded, her arms crossed over her chest as she sat down at the kitchen table. I made us tea, though she didn't touch hers. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she said finally, her voice trembling. "I don't expect you to," I said, my throat tight. "But I need you to know how sorry I am. I never wanted to hurt you." "You didn't think about me at all," she shot back, her eyes flashing with anger. "You didn't think about how this would affect me or Chloe. You just did whatever you wanted." "You're right," I said quietly, tears welling in my eyes. "I was selfish. I wasn't thinking about anyone else, and that was wrong. But Emma, you need to know that what I feel for Alan, it's real. It's not some meaningless fling." She shook her head, her jaw tightening. "That doesn't make it okay." "I know," I said, "but I hope that someday you'll understand." Alan wasn't having much luck with Chloe either. "She won't even look at me," he told me during one of our phone calls. "Every time I try to talk to her, she just shuts down." "I'm sorry," I said, guilt gnawing at me. "It's not your fault," he replied, though we both knew that wasn't entirely true. Alan and I stopped seeing each other after that. Not because we didn't want to, but because we knew it was the only way to have any chance of repairing the damage we'd caused. Over the next few months, things with Emma slowly began to improve. She started coming home more often, her conversations with me becoming less strained. One night, as we sat together on the couch watching a movie, she turned to me suddenly. "Do you still talk to him?" she asked, her tone cautious. "No," I said honestly. "Not since you left." She nodded, her gaze dropping to her hands. "Do you miss him?" "Every day," I admitted, my voice trembling. She didn't say anything after that, but the fact that she'd asked felt like progress. Alan's relationship with Chloe took longer to mend. She stayed distant for months, barely acknowledging him during the rare times they were together. But Alan didn't give up. He kept reaching out, showing up for her even when she pushed him away. Eventually, she started to soften. It wasn't a grand reconciliation, just small moments, a thank you for driving her to school, a quick smile when he made her laugh. But for Alan, it was enough. I ran into Alan one day at the grocery store, months after we'd last spoken. He looked the same, tired, but still carrying that quiet strength that had drawn me to him in the first place. "Hi," I said, my heart racing. "Hi," he replied, his smile soft. For a moment we just stood there, the weight of everything we'd been through hanging between us. "How's Emma?" he asked finally. "She's doing better," I said. "And Chloe?" "She's coming around," he said, his voice filled with quiet hope. There was so much I wanted to say, so many things I still felt, but instead I just smiled. "I'm glad." "Take care of yourself, Claire," he said, his voice gentle. "You too," I replied. And just like that, he was gone. In the end, I learned that love isn't always enough. Sometimes, the timing is wrong or the circumstances are too complicated to overcome. But that doesn't mean it wasn't worth it. What Alan and I had was real, even if it couldn't last. And while I'll always carry the memory of him with me, I know that my first priority will always be Emma. Life is messy, and people make mistakes. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that forgiveness, while difficult, is possible. Emma and I aren't perfect, but we're healing. And for now, that's enough.